The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Whitmore Conservatory, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. 17-year-old Elena stood in the hallway, her white cane tapping gently as she tried to get a sense of the space around her. Her mother stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder, offering silent support. This wasn't just any building. Whitmore Conservatory was the kind of place that produced world-class musicians. The kind of place where legends were born, and today, they were holding open auditions for their youth orchestra. Elena had been preparing for this moment for months, maybe even years, if she was being honest with herself. The hallway buzzed with nervous energy. Other students clutched their instruments, some running through scales under their breath, others pacing back and forth. Elena could hear a cellist practicing somewhere down the hall, the deep notes resonating through the corridor. A flutist was warming up nearby, running through quick passages that sounded like birds taking flight. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" her mother whispered, leaning close. Elena managed a small smile. Nervous, but ready. She'd been playing violin since she was 6 years old. Her grandfather had placed the instrument in her hands one afternoon, and from that first scratch of the bow across the strings, she was hooked. It didn't matter that she couldn't see the notes on a page. Music had always made sense to her in a way that transcended sight. She could feel it, understand it, become part of it. The door to the audition room opened, and a boy walked out looking deflated. Elena heard him mutter something to his friends about how tough the judges were, especially the head maestro. Her stomach tightened, but she pushed the fear down. She'd come too far to let nerves stop her now. "Elena Martinez?" A voice called from the doorway. "That's us," her mother said, gently guiding her forward. They walked into the audition room together, Elena's cane sweeping across the unfamiliar floor. She could sense the space was large, could hear the slight echo of their footsteps. There was the smell of old wood and rosin in the air. This was a room where music lived. At a long table sat 3 judges. Elena couldn't see them, but she could feel their eyes on her. The weight of their attention was almost physical. "Thank you for coming," one of the judges said, a woman with a kind voice. "Please, take your place at the center mark." Elena's mother helped guide her to the spot, then quietly stepped back. Elena set down her violin case and knelt to open it, her practiced fingers finding each familiar clasp by touch. She'd done this thousands of times. The routine was comforting, but then she heard it. A sigh. Heavy and deliberate. "Is this really necessary?" The voice was male, older, with a thick accent she couldn't quite place. Russian, maybe. "We have 30 more students to hear today." Well say. Elena's hands paused on her violin case. The room suddenly felt colder. "Maestro Rostov, she has every right to audition," the kind woman's voice said, though there was a nervousness to it now. "I'm not saying she doesn't have the right," the man replied, his tone dripping with impatience. "I'm questioning whether this is a productive use of our time." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. She'd faced skepticism before, encountered people who assumed she couldn't do things because she was blind, but she'd never experienced it quite so bluntly, quite so publicly. Her mother took a step forward. "Excuse me, but..." "It's okay, Mom," Elena said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. She continued assembling her violin, lifting it from its case with the reverence it deserved. This instrument had been her grandfather's. It was one of the few things she had left of him. She could hear whispers now, coming from the hallway. The door must not have closed all the way. Other students were listening, bearing witness to her humiliation. Elena stood, violin in hand, and positioned herself to play. She raised her chin, refusing to show how much those words had stung. "I'm ready when you are," she said. "Of course you are," Maestro Rostov said, and she could hear the eye roll in his voice. "By all means. Proceed." Elena raised her violin to her shoulder, her bow poised above the strings, but before she could draw it across, The maestro's voice cut through the air again. Wait, just one moment. Elena lowered her bow slightly. Can you even read the music? He asked. The required piece is quite complex. How do you know what you're supposed to play? I learned it by ear, sir, Elena replied, keeping her voice level. I've memorized the entire piece. By ear, he repeated, saying the words like they were something distasteful. She heard him say something in Russian to one of the other judges. There was a response, too quiet for her to make out, but the tone suggested discomfort. Tell me then, Maestro Rostov continued. Since you've memorized it so thoroughly, what is the key signature of the piece? What's the time signature? Who composed it? In what year? Elena took a breath. She'd expected difficulty, but this felt like an interrogation. The piece is Meditation from Thais by Jules Massenet, composed in 1894. It's in D major, common time, though with significant tempo variations throughout. Silence. But not the good kind. Not the impressed kind. The heavy kind. Anyone can memorize facts, Maestro Rostov said dismissively. Music is more than just notes on a page, Miss Martinez. It requires interpretation, feeling, the ability to respond to a conductor's cues. How do you expect to follow visual cues when you cannot see? I listen, Elena said simply. I can hear when the orchestra breathes, when the tempo shifts. I feel the music around me. How poetic, the maestro said, and the sarcasm was unmistakable. But this is a serious institution. We're not looking for poets. We're looking for musicians who can perform at the highest level. Orchestra playing requires precision, coordination, visual awareness. More whispers from the hallway. Elena could sense the crowd growing. Students were gathering to witness this spectacle. This confrontation. Some part of her wanted to pack up her violin and leave, to spare herself further embarrassment. But a stronger part of her, the part that had spent countless hours practicing in her room, that had learned to navigate a world not built for her, that had promised her grandfather she would never give up on music, that part refused to move. Her mother's voice came again, firmer this time. My daughter has every right to audition. If you're not willing to give her a fair chance. Mom, Elena interrupted gently. She turned her face toward where she knew the judges sat. May I play now? She asked. I think that's the only fair way to judge whether I belong here or not. She heard the maestro shift in his chair. A pen clicked. Papers rustled. Fine, he said, the word sharp as a blade. Play. Let's see what all this preparation has achieved. Elena raised her violin once more. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Her hands wanted to shake, but she steadied them through sheer force of will. This was it. This was her moment. Not to prove something to Maestro Rostov, though that would be satisfying. Not even to prove something to the conservatory or the students listening in the hall. This was to prove something to herself. That she belonged here. That her grandfather's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. That blindness didn't make her less of a musician. It just made her a different kind of musician. She took one final breath, closed her eyes though it made no difference, and touched her bow to the strings. And then she began to play. The first note hung in the air like a promise. Pure, clear, and achingly beautiful. Elena drew her bow across the strings with the kind of confidence that comes from years of practice. From countless hours spent in conversation with her instrument. But Maestro Rostov wasn't ready to be impressed. Not yet. Stop, he commanded, his voice cutting through the music like a knife. Elena's bow froze mid-stroke. The note died abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. What piece have you chosen? The maestro asked, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care about the answer. Meditation from Thais, sir. As I mentioned before. I know what you mentioned, he said impatiently. I'm asking why you chose this piece. Do you understand what it's about? Do you comprehend the story behind it? Elena felt her cheeks flush. She'd studied this piece inside and out, had listened to dozens of recordings, had asked her grandfather about it before he passed. She knew it better than she knew most things. "It's from an opera," she began, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Thais was a courtesan in ancient Egypt who converts to Christianity. This meditation is played during her transformation, her moment of spiritual awakening. It's about redemption and finding something pure in yourself that you didn't know existed. "How touching," Maestro Rostov said, and somehow he made even that sound like an insult. "And you believe you can convey all of that emotion? You, at 17, can capture the depth of spiritual transformation?" One of the other judges, the woman with the kind voice, spoke up. "Maestro, perhaps we should let her play the piece before we—" "I'm simply ensuring she understands what she's attempting," he interrupted. "Too many young musicians choose pieces that are technically beyond them or emotionally inappropriate. They pick something because it sounds impressive, without understanding the weight of what they're playing." Elena's grip tightened on her violin. She could hear more students gathering in the hallway. The whispers were growing louder. Word was spreading through the conservatory that something unusual was happening in the audition room. "I understand the piece, sir," Elena said quietly. "My grandfather helped me understand it before he died. He played in orchestras for 40 years. He taught me that music isn't just about hitting the right notes. It's about feeling something true and sharing that feeling with everyone listening." "Your grandfather," Maestro Rostov said, leaning back in his chair. She could hear the creak of leather. "And where did he play?" Mexico City Philharmonic. Second violin section for most of his career." "Dunna. Second violin," the maestro repeated, as if that explained everything. "Not concertmaster. Not first chair. Not—" The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elena felt anger flare in her chest. Hot and sudden. Her grandfather had been an incredible musician. A patient teacher. A man who had given her the gift of music when the world seemed determined to tell her what she couldn't do. "He was a good man," Elena said, and her voice had an edge to it now. "He taught me everything he knew. He never made me feel like I couldn't do something just because I'm blind." "How admirable," Maestro Rostov said. "But we're not grading you on sentiment, Miss Martinez. We're evaluating whether you belong at this conservatory, whether you can meet our standards." "Then let me play," Elena said, her patience wearing thin. "Let me show you instead of telling you." The maestro made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You have spirit. I'll give you that. Though spirit doesn't translate to skill." He paused, then continued. "Before you play, let me explain something to you. Something you need to understand about professional music." Elena waited, her violin still positioned against her shoulder, her bow ready. "Orchestra playing is about unity," he said. "It's about watching the conductor's baton, following every gesture, every cue. It's about seeing the person next to you, matching their bowstroke, their breathing. How do you expect to do any of that if you cannot see?" "I would learn to feel it," Elena replied. "I would listen more carefully than anyone else. You would slow everyone down," he interrupted. "You would require special accommodations, extra rehearsal time, someone to guide you to your seat, someone to tell you what everyone else can simply see for themselves." The woman judge spoke again, more firmly this time. "Victor, this is completely inappropriate. She hasn't even had a chance to—" "I'm being realistic, Anna," he said. Someone should have been with this girl before she came here and wasted everyone's time, including her own." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. Exactly. But crack. Like ice, beginning to shift. Her mother's voice came from behind her, shaking with anger. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way? She has worked harder than any student you have here. She has overcome obstacles you couldn't possibly imagine." Mom. "No, Mija, I'm not going to stand here and let him—" "Please," Elena repeated, more firmly this time. I need to do this myself. Her mother fell silent, though Elena could hear her breathing hard, could sense the fury radiating from her. Elena turned back toward the judge's table, toward Maestro Rostov and his certainty that she didn't belong here, that she would never be good enough, that her blindness made her less than the sighted students waiting in the hall. You're right, Elena said, and her voice was surprisingly calm now. I can't see the conductor's baton. I can't watch the person next to me. I can't read music off a page like everyone else does. She heard the maestro shift in his seat, probably preparing to tell her she could pack up and leave. But I can hear things other people miss, Elena continued. I can hear when someone's half a beat behind, when the intonation is slightly off, when the emotion doesn't match what the music is asking for. I've had to develop my ears because I don't have anything else. And maybe that makes me different from your other students. But different doesn't mean worse. A nice speech, Maestro Rostov said. But speeches don't win auditions. No, Elena agreed. Music does. She raised her violin once more, and this time there was something different in her posture. Something that said she was done asking for permission, done apologizing for taking up space, done trying to convince anyone that she deserved to be here. She was just going to play. And they could decide what to do with that. I'm going to play now, she announced. The whole piece, from beginning to end. And then you can make whatever decision you want. But at least you'll know what you're rejecting. There was a long moment of silence. Elena could practically hear Maestro Rostov's internal debate. Would he stop her again? Would he tell her to leave before she even started? But perhaps something in her voice, some note of determination, made him reconsider. Fine, he said finally. Play your piece. Let's see what all this defiance sounds like in musical form. Elena took a breath. Then another. She blocked out everything else. The whispers from the hallway. Her mother's worried presence behind her. The judges at their table with their pens and score sheets and predetermined ideas about what a musician should be. She thought about her grandfather instead. The way his hands had guided hers on the fingerboard when she was small. The way he'd told her that music was the one language that everyone could speak. That crossed every border. That made the impossible possible. This is for you, abuelo, she whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. And then, for real this time, with nothing left to prove except everything, Elena began to play. The first note that came from Elena's violin was nothing like what anyone expected. It wasn't just technically perfect, though it was that. It wasn't just the right pitch at the right volume with the right tone, though it was all of those things too. What made that first note extraordinary was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be taught or measured or written down on a score sheet. It had soul. The sound seemed to fill the audition room from corner to corner, wrapping around everyone present like a warm blanket on a cold night. Elena's bow moved across the strings with absolute certainty, drawing out a melody that was somehow both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. Maestro Rostov's hand, which had been reaching for his pen to mark another rejection on his list, stopped in midair. He sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes fixed on the blind girl standing in front of him. The piece Elena had chosen, Meditation from Thais, was famous for being emotionally demanding. It required more than just technical skill. It needed a musician who could pour their whole heart into every phrase, who could make the violin sing like a human voice, who could tell a story without using any words at all. And Elena was doing exactly that. Her body swayed gently as she played, moving with the music, like they were dancing partners who knew each other's every step. Her face tilted upward, and there was something almost peaceful in her expression. As if playing this piece brought her to a place where nothing else mattered. Not the judges watching her, not the students crowding the hallway, not even the maestro who had spent the last 15 minutes trying to tear her down. In this moment, there was only the music. The melody climbed higher, each note perfectly placed, perfectly shaped. Elena's vibrato was controlled but expressive, adding warmth without being overdone. Her bow moved smoothly across the strings, never scratching, never wavering, just producing this pure, crystalline sound that seemed impossible for someone so young to create. The other two judges leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated. The woman named Anna had tears forming in the corners of her eyes. The third judge, who hadn't spoken at all during the confrontation, looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. In the hallway, the whispers had stopped completely. Students who had been muttering about the drama unfolding inside were now pressed against the doorframe, trying to get a glimpse, straining to hear every note. Some of them were music students who'd been playing for years, who knew exactly how difficult this piece was, who understood that what they were hearing wasn't just good, it was exceptional. Elena moved into the middle section of the piece, where the melody became more passionate, more urgent. Her bow pressure increased, drawing out richer, deeper tones from the instrument. This was the part of the meditation where Thais struggles with her decision, where she's torn between her old life and the new path opening before her. And somehow, impossibly, Elena made you feel that struggle, made you understand what it meant to stand at a crossroads, to have to choose between who you were and who you wanted to become. Maestro Rostov's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of the table. He looked like a man watching his entire worldview crumble in real time. Because everything he'd said about Elena, every assumption he'd made, every dismissive comment about her abilities, was being proven wrong with each passing measure. She wasn't just keeping up with the piece, she was mastering it. She was interpreting it with a maturity that most musicians twice her age never achieved. The melody shifted again, becoming softer, more introspective. This was the resolution, where Thais accepts her transformation, where she finds peace with her choice. Elena's playing became almost whisper quiet, each note floating delicately in the air like a feather drifting down. Her dynamics were perfect, not just technically accurate, but emotionally perfect. She knew exactly when to pull back, when to push forward, when to let the silence between notes speak as loudly as the notes themselves. One of the students in the hallway, a girl holding a cello case, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She wasn't the only one affected. There was something about Elena's playing that reached past your defenses, that found the soft parts of you and reminded you why you fell in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about competitions or auditions or proving you were better than everyone else. It was about connection, about expressing feelings too big for words, about touching something universal and human and real. Elena approached the final phrases of the piece, the part where everything comes together in a moment of pure, transcendent beauty. Her bow moved with incredible tenderness, coaxing out notes so sweet they almost hurt to hear. This was where Thais achieves enlightenment, where she becomes something more than she was. And listening to Elena play it, you believed it. You believed in transformation and redemption and the possibility of becoming your best self. The technical execution was flawless. Every shift in position was seamless. Every trill was clean and precise. Every harmonic rang out clear and true. But again, the technique wasn't what made this performance special. It was the understanding behind it, the feeling, the truth. Elena played the final sustained note, letting it linger in the air, her bow moving slower and slower until it finally came to rest. The note continued to resonate for a moment, then gradually faded into silence. Complete, absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Elena lowered her violin slowly, carefully, and stood there waiting. Her chest rose and fell from the exertion of pouring everything she had into those few minutes of music. A small bead of sweat traced down the side of her face. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves now, but from the intensity of what she'd just done. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Elena's mother stood frozen behind her, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The students in the hallway looked at each other in disbelief, mouths open, eyes wide. Some of them were crying too, though they probably couldn't explain exactly why. At the judges' table, Anna made no attempt to hide her tears anymore. They flowed freely down her cheeks as she stared at Elena, with something close to awe. The third judge sat perfectly still, his pen hanging limply in his hand, forgotten. And Maestro Victor Rostov, the legendary conductor who had seen and heard thousands of musicians over his long career, who prided himself on never being impressed, who had spent the entire audition trying to dismiss this blind girl as a waste of time, looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. His face had gone pale. His hands, which had been so dismissive earlier, now gripped the edge of the table, like he needed to hold on to something solid. His eyes, which had been hard and judgmental, were now wide with something that looked almost like fear, because he had been wrong. Completely, totally, embarrassingly wrong. The silence continued for another few heartbeats. Then, from somewhere in the hallway, a single student began to clap, slowly at first, then faster. Another student joined in, then another. Within seconds, the hallway erupted in applause, but in the audition room itself, the three judges still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. Elena stood there, violin at her side, waiting for someone to say something. Anything. Her heart pounded in her chest. She'd given them everything she had. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to offer. Now it was their turn to respond. Maestro Rostov's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he suddenly pushed it back and stood up. His movements were sharp, almost violent. Elena turned her face toward the sound, unable to see the expression on his face, unable to know if he was about to yell at her, or dismiss her, or tell her she still wasn't good enough. His footsteps echoed in the quiet room as he walked toward her. Each step felt like it took forever. Elena waited, her grandfather's violin held loosely in her hand, and wondered if she'd done enough. Maestro Rostov stood directly in front of Elena now. She could hear his breathing, quick and shallow, like he'd just run a great distance. The room remained silent, except for the faint applause still filtering in from the hallway. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was completely different from before. The sharp edge was gone. The condescension had vanished. Now he just sounded confused, almost shaken. Elena wasn't sure how to answer. The question felt like a trap, though his tone suggested it wasn't meant to be one. "My grandfather," she said quietly. "He taught me everything." Listening to recordings, trying to understand what the great performers were doing. "Recordings," Maestro Rostov repeated, like he was trying to process information that didn't make sense. "You learned this from recordings? No formal training? No conservatory preparation?" "We couldn't afford regular lessons," Elena admitted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "My mom works 2 jobs. We did what we could. My grandfather gave me lessons until he got sick, and after that, I just practiced on my own, used whatever resources I could find." The maestro was quiet for a long moment. Elena could feel his eyes on her, studying her in a way that was completely different from before. Earlier, he'd looked at her like she was an inconvenience. Now it felt like he was really seeing her, for the first time. "How many hours do you practice each day?" he asked. 4, usually. Sometimes 5 or 6 if I have time. "And you memorize everything by ear?" "I don't have much choice," Elena said with a small shrug. "But, honestly, I think it helps. When you can't see the notes on the page, you have to really listen. You have to understand what's happening in the music, not just play what's written. You have to feel it." Maestro Rostov turned away from her, pacing back toward the judge's table. Elena heard him say something in Russian, under his breath. It sounded like he was arguing with himself. The judge named Anna spoke up, her voice still thick with emotion. "I've been teaching at this conservatory for 15 years, and I've never heard a student play with that level of maturity and emotional depth. Never." "Thank you," Elena managed, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. "The technique alone is remarkable," the third judge added, speaking for the first time. "But it's the interpretation that's truly special. You understood that piece, not just intellectually, but emotionally. That's rare, at any age." Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. After everything that had happened, After all the doubt and dismissiveness, hearing these words felt almost surreal. Maestro Rostov had stopped pacing. He stood with his back to everyone, his hands clasped behind him. The silence stretched on long enough that Elena started to wonder if she should say something, do something, leave maybe. Then he turned around. "I need to speak with my colleagues," he said, his voice formal again, controlled. "Please wait outside for a moment." Elena's heart sank. This was it. They were going to deliberate and then reject her anyway. Maybe her playing had been good, but not good enough to overlook her disability. Not good enough to justify the extra accommodations she would need. Her mother's hand found her shoulder, guiding her toward the door. "Come on, sweetheart." As they walked out into the hallway, the students who had been listening erupted in whispers and questions. A few of them even congratulated Elena, told her she'd played beautifully, but their words barely registered. All she could think about was what was happening behind that closed door. "You were amazing," her mother whispered, pulling her close. "No matter what they decide, you were absolutely amazing." Elena nodded, but she couldn't speak. Her throat felt too tight. She'd put everything into that performance, every ounce of hope and determination and love for music that she had. And now all she could do was wait. Inside the audition room, the three judges sat in heavy silence. Anna spoke first. "We have to accept her. We have to. That was one of the best auditions I've ever witnessed." The third judge, whose name was Dr. Chen, nodded emphatically. "The technical skill is there, obviously, but more importantly, she has that indefinable quality that separates good musicians from great ones. She has artistry." Both of them looked at Maestro Rostov, who sat perfectly still, staring at his hands. "Victor," Anna said gently, "you know I'm right." "Of course you're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew you were right the moment she played that first note." "Then what's the problem?" Maestro Rostov looked up, and there was something in his expression that neither of them had seen before. Shame. Real, genuine shame. "The problem," he said slowly, "is that I treated that girl abominably. I judged her before she played a single note. I dismissed her talent, insulted her teacher, questioned her worth, all because I saw her disability before I saw her ability." "You did," Anna agreed, not sugarcoating it. "It was cruel and unnecessary. I've become exactly what I used to fight against," Maestro Rostov continued, his voice growing more agitated. "When I was young, coming to this country, people dismissed me because of my accent, because I was different. And now here I am, doing the same thing to a 17-year-old girl who has more talent in her little finger than half our current students have in their entire bodies." He stood up abruptly, began pacing again. "She reminded me of something I'd forgotten, something I lost somewhere along the way. She plays with pure joy, pure truth. No ego, no pretense. Just honest, beautiful music." Dr. Chen cleared his throat. "So, what do you want to do?" Maestro Rostov stopped pacing and looked at his colleagues. "I want to offer her a full scholarship. I want to personally oversee her training, and I want to apologize to her in front of everyone who witnessed how I treated her." Anna's eyebrows shot up. "I have to," he said firmly. "That girl deserves better than what I gave her. She deserves recognition. She deserves respect. And she deserves to know that her disability doesn't define her limitations. I am the one with limitations. Limitations of imagination, of compassion, of vision." There was a beat of silence. Then Anna smiled. "Well then, I think we have a decision to make official." "Clear my schedule for this afternoon," Maestro Rostov said, straightening his jacket. "I'll need to completely reorganize my teaching commitments. If I'm going to work with Elena properly, I'll need regular time slots." "You haven't taught a private student in over a decade," Dr. Chen pointed out, looking surprised. "Exactly," Maestro Rostov said. "I've been so focused on conducting, on performances, on my own career, that I forgot why I got into this profession in the first place. To nurture talent, to help young musicians find their voice. That girl out there just reminded me of my purpose. He walked to the door, his hand on the handle, then paused. She can't see, but she saw into the heart of that music more clearly than I've seen anything in years. She taught me more in 5 minutes than I've learned in the last 5 years. With that, he opened the door. Elena stood in the hallway, her mother beside her, surrounded by other students who were still talking in excited whispers about her performance. When the door opened, everyone fell silent. Maestro Rostov stepped out, and every eye turned to him. He looked at Elena, and for the first time since she'd entered that building, there was no judgment in his gaze. Only respect. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hallway. "I need to speak with you, and your mother. Would you please come back inside?" Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she let her mother guide her back into the audition room. The door closed behind them, shutting out the curious students and their whispers. This was the moment. Whatever happened next would change everything. The door clicked shut behind Elena and her mother, and suddenly the room felt much smaller than it had before. Elena's hands were shaking slightly, and she gripped her violin case tighter to steady them. "Please, sit down," Maestro Rostov said. And there was something different in his voice. Something softer. Elena's mother guided her to a chair, and they both sat. Elena could hear the 3 judges settling back at their table. The scrape of chairs, the rustle of papers, the small sounds that filled the nervous silence. "Miss Martinez," Maestro Rostov began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "Elena. May I call you Elena? May I call you Elena?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. There was a pause, and Elena could sense the maestro choosing his words carefully. "I need to begin by offering you an apology," he said. "What I did today, how I treated you before you played, was inexcusable. I made assumptions about your abilities based on your disability. I judged you without giving you a fair chance. I was dismissive, rude, and deeply unprofessional." Elena sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. This was not what she'd expected. "I have no excuse for my behavior," he continued. And his voice carried real weight. Real regret. "I tell myself I'm protecting the standards of this institution. But the truth is, I had become narrow-minded. I had forgotten that music doesn't care if you can see or not. Music cares if you can feel, if you can listen, if you can connect with something deeper than technique." Elena's mother squeezed her hand gently. "You reminded me of something essential today," Maestro Rostov said. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Not because of perfect technique or flawless execution, though you certainly have both, but because of the truth you brought to that piece. The honesty, the vulnerability. You played like someone who understands that music is a conversation, not a performance." He paused again, and Elena heard him stand up, heard his footsteps, as he moved closer to where she sat. "I would like to offer you a full scholarship to Whitmore Conservatory," he said. "All tuition, all fees, everything covered. You've more than earned it." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her mother made a small sound beside her, something between a gasp and a sob. "But more than that," Maestro Rostov continued. "I would like to offer you something I haven't offered a student in more than 10 years. Private lessons. With me, once a week, we would work together on your technique, your repertoire, your musical development." Now Elena couldn't hold back the tears. They spilled down her cheeks as the reality of what he was saying sank in. A full scholarship. Private lessons with one of the most respected conductors in the country. This was beyond anything she'd dared to hope for. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Anna suggested gently, and Elena could hear the smile in her voice. "Yes," Elena said, then louder. "Yes." Absolutely yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Her mother was crying openly now, pulling Elena into a tight embrace. Maestro Rostov returned to his seat, and Elena could hear papers being shuffled, forms being pulled out. There will be paperwork, of course, Dr. Chen said. We'll need to discuss accommodations. Make sure you have everything you need to succeed here. We've never had a blind student in our orchestra before, Anna admitted. But that's our limitation. Not yours. We'll figure it out together. Whatever you need, we'll make it work. I don't need much, Elena said quickly. Just maybe someone to help me navigate the building at first, until I learn the layout. And I can record lessons if that's okay, so I can listen back to them later. But I promise, I won't slow anyone down. I'll work twice as hard as everyone else if I have to. You'll work as hard as you need to, Maestro Rostov corrected. No more, no less. And I have no doubt, you'll excel here. Elena, what you demonstrated today wasn't just talent. It was dedication, passion, and a deep understanding of music that most students take years to develop. Over the next 20 minutes, they discussed practical details. When Elena would start, what classes she'd take, how rehearsals would work. Throughout it all, Elena felt like she was floating, like this couldn't possibly be real. As they wrapped up the administrative details, Maestro Rostov cleared his throat once more. There's one more thing, he said. Elena, would you be willing to let me share what happened here today? Not just your performance, but all of it, including my shameful behavior at the beginning. Elena turned her face toward him, confused. Why would you want to share that? Because I think it's important, he said seriously. I've been teaching for 35 years. I've trained hundreds of musicians, and somewhere along the way, I became arrogant. I started believing I could judge talent at a glance, that I knew who belonged here and who didn't. You proved me spectacularly wrong, and I think that's a lesson worth sharing. He paused, then continued. Too many talented people are dismissed because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of what a musician should look like, sound like, or be like. If sharing this story helps even one person reconsider their assumptions, then my embarrassment will be worth it. Elena thought about it for a moment. The idea of people knowing how she'd been treated, how she'd been doubted, made her uncomfortable. But then she thought about other kids like her, other musicians with disabilities who might be told they weren't good enough, who might be turned away before anyone heard them play. Okay, she said. You can share it, but only if you tell the whole story. Not just the bad parts. The good parts too. How music can surprise you. How talent shows up in unexpected places. How being different doesn't mean being less. Deal, Maestro Rostov said, and Elena could hear the smile in his voice. As Elena and her mother gathered their things to leave, Anna approached them. Elena, before you go, I just want you to know something. In 15 years of teaching here, I've heard thousands of auditions. Yours was the one that reminded me why I chose this career. Thank you for that gift. Thank you for listening, Elena said simply. They made their way back out into the hallway, where a small crowd of students still lingered. When Elena emerged, several of them congratulated her, asked if she'd gotten in, told her they'd never heard anything like her performance. One girl, the cellist Elena, had heard practicing earlier, approached shyly. I just wanted to say, what you did in there was amazing. And not just the playing. The way you stood up for yourself. The way you didn't let anyone make you feel small. That took real courage. Elena smiled. Thanks. That means a lot. As they walked toward the exit, Elena's mother leaned close. Elena thought about it. She thought about her grandfather, about how proud he would be right now. She thought about all the hours of practice, all the doubt she'd pushed through, all the times people had told her that music might not be realistic for someone like her. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said. 3 years later, Elena stood on the stage of Whitmore Conservatory's concert hall, as the youngest concertmaster in the school's history. The orchestra behind her was tuning up, preparing for their winter performance. In the front row sat her mother, beaming with pride, and on the podium, preparing to conduct, stood Maestro Rostov. Before he raised his baton, he looked at Elena and gave her a small nod. It was a gesture of respect, of recognition, of gratitude for everything she'd taught him about music, about humility, about seeing beyond the surface. Elena lifted her violin, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's instrument against her shoulder. She couldn't see the audience filling the hall, couldn't see the other musicians around her, couldn't see the lights or the conductor's gestures, but she could feel the music waiting to be born. She could hear the orchestra breathing together. She could sense the magic that was about to happen when all these separate voices joined into one. Maestro Rostov raised his baton, and in that moment before the downbeat, Elena smiled. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant to do. And no one, not even herself on her worst days, could make her doubt that anymore. The baton came down, and the music began, and it was beautiful.